The baby monitor crackled at 11:47 p.m., pulling me from the broken lock I'd been wrestling with for the past hour. Our daughter Emma's soft breathing filled the static, a gentle rhythm that usually brought me peace. But tonight, something else came through the speaker. Footsteps in the hallway. Veda's voice barely above a whisper. He has no idea. He's too stupid to notice. I froze, screwdriver halfway to the lock mechanism. The monitor picked up everything in that old house. Every creak, every whisper, every secret conversation she thought was private. Zane, seriously, the idiot's asleep upstairs. We could plan this right under his nose, and he'd never figure it out. Zane. I'd heard that name before, floating around Veda's work conversations. Some hotshot consultant at her fintech startup. The guy with the expensive car and the trust fund smile. I set down the screwdriver and listened. Next week works perfectly, she continued. Brooks will be at that school maintenance conference until Thursday. We'll have the whole house. My name in her mouth sounded different now. Clinical, dismissive, like she was discussing a piece of furniture that needed moving. The monitor went quiet except for Emma's breathing. I heard Veda's footsteps retreat to our bedroom, the soft click of the door closing behind her. I sat there in the dim light of my workshop, surrounded by the tools of my trade, the honest work of fixing things that were broken. Maintenance supervisor at Whitmore Academy wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me satisfaction. Every day, I solved problems. I made things work again. Now I had a different kind of problem to solve. Over the next few days, I started noticing things I'd apparently been too stupid to see before. The way Veda showered immediately after coming home from work, even though she'd never been particularly concerned about office germs. The way she angled her phone away from me when texting, fingers moving rapidly across the screen. The way our joint checking account had been bleeding small amounts, 50 here, 80 there, for cash withdrawals I couldn't account for. Just coffee and lunch, she'd say when I asked. You know how expensive downtown is. I knew exactly how expensive downtown was. I also knew that $50 bought a lot more than coffee. The monitor became my evening companion. I'd work on small projects in my shop, volume turned low, listening to the static and the occasional snippet of conversation. Most nights brought nothing but Emma's gentle sounds and the house settling into sleep. But twice more, I heard Veda's whispered phone calls. He fixed the lock on the front door today. Took him 3 hours. I swear, sometimes I think he does it slowly on purpose, just to look busy. The lock had been sticking for weeks. The mechanism was old and needed complete disassembly to clean properly. But in Veda's version of events, I was just playing with tools to avoid real responsibility. I can't wait until Thursday. This house feels like a prison sometimes, especially with him always underfoot. Thursday, the conference, 3 days away. I'd been looking forward to the maintenance conference for months. It was the one time each year when I got to learn about new techniques, network with other professionals, and feel like my work mattered beyond just fixing whatever broke that week. Now it felt like I was being shipped off so my wife could play house with her boyfriend. That's when Isla called. Brooks, hi, it's Isla Corvin, Veda's friend from the gallery? I knew Isla, Veda's college roommate, now an art curator with her own small gallery downtown, tall, thoughtful, with dark hair she wore, pulled back, and eyes that actually seemed to see you when she looked at you. She'd been to our house for dinner parties, always polite, always asking thoughtful questions about my work, while others made small talk. I was hoping we could get together this week, she continued. I want to plan something special for Veda's birthday next month. A surprise party, maybe? I know how much she means to you, and I thought you'd have the best ideas about what would make her happy. The irony wasn't lost on me. Veda's best friend wanted to plan a surprise party while Veda was planning surprises of her own. That sounds great, I heard myself saying. When works for you? How about dinner tomorrow? That little Italian place on Maple Street, 7 o'clock? I agreed and hung up, staring at the phone in my hand. The monitor crackled softly in the background, Emma's breathing steady and peaceful. At least someone in this house was sleeping well. The next evening, I found myself sitting across from Isla in a corner booth at Rossetti's, the kind of family-owned place where the owner remembered your name and the wine list was written on a chalkboard. Isla had arrived first, already nursing a glass of red wine, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back like usual. Thanks for coming, she said as I slid into the booth. I wasn't sure you'd want to get involved in party planning. I want Veda to be happy, I said, which was true enough. Or had been true until recently. Isla studied my face for a moment, those perceptive eyes taking in details I wasn't sure I wanted her to see. You look tired, Brooks. Everything okay at home? The question caught me off guard. When was the last time someone had asked how I was doing? Really asked, not just made polite conversation? Just work stuff, I said. You know how it is. Actually, I don't, she replied with a small smile. Tell me about it. What's it like keeping a whole school running? So I told her. About the ancient heating system that required constant attention, about the satisfaction of solving a problem that had stumped the previous maintenance guy for years, about the way the students had started saying hello to me in the hallways instead of looking right through me. Isla listened, really listened, asking follow-up questions, nodding at the right moments, treating my work like it mattered. Veda's lucky, she said when I finished, having someone who takes such care with everything he touches. Something in her tone made me look up from my pasta. There was an odd expression on her face, almost sad. Is she? I asked. Isla took a long sip of wine before answering. That's what we're here to talk about, right? Making sure she feels lucky. The party. We spent the next hour discussing venues and guest lists and catering options. Isla took notes in a small leather notebook, her handwriting neat and precise. But I found myself watching her hands more than listening to the words, noticing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way she smiled when I made a dry comment about Veda's coworkers. I should probably head home, I said when we'd finished planning. Early morning tomorrow. Of course. Isla closed her notebook and looked at me directly. Brooks, can I ask you something? I nodded. Are you happy? The question hung in the air between us. In the background, I could hear other conversations, the clink of silverware, the soft jazz playing over the restaurant's sound system. Normal sounds of normal people having normal evenings. That's a complicated question, I said finally. The best ones usually are. I drove home thinking about that conversation, about the way Isla had looked at me when she asked if I was happy, like she already knew the answer but wanted to hear me say it. The house was quiet when I got home. Veda was already in bed, or pretending to be. I checked on Emma, sleeping peacefully in her crib, then headed to my workshop to tinker with a broken desk lamp one of the teachers had asked me to look at. The monitor crackled to life around midnight. Tomorrow night, Veda's voice whispered. He'll be at that conference until Thursday. We'll finally have some time alone. I set down my tools and listened. I know. I feel guilty sometimes too. But Zane, you have to understand. He's just so ordinary. He fixes things and comes home and watches television. He has no ambition, no dreams beyond his little maintenance projects. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes. Plans for dinner at some upscale restaurant I'd never heard of. Talk about a weekend getaway they were considering. Laughter about how oblivious I was to what was happening right under my nose. She wasn't wrong about that last part. I had been oblivious. But I wasn't anymore. I spent the rest of the night making my own plans. Wednesday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made our old house feel even more like a creaking ship riding out a storm. I loaded my overnight bag into the truck, kissed Veda goodbye at the kitchen counter, and told her I'd call when I got to the hotel. Drive safe, she said, but her attention was already on her phone, fingers dancing across the screen. I'll miss you. The words sounded hollow, like dialogue from a play she'd rehearsed but didn't quite believe. I drove exactly 12 miles toward the conference hotel, then pulled into a truck stop and called Mason Reeves. Mason worked night security at the academy, a former cop who'd taken early retirement after a back injury ended his patrol days. We'd become friends over late-night conversations when I was working on emergency repairs and he was making his rounds. He was the kind of guy who noticed everything and forgot nothing, exactly what I needed right now. Brooks, thought you were at some maintenance conference. Change of plans, I said. I need a favor, a big one. Mason met me at a diner 20 minutes later, sliding into the booth across from me with the careful movements of someone whose spine had seen better days. He was in his 50s, graying haircut military short, eyes that missed nothing. Talk to me, he said after ordering coffee. I told him everything, the monitor conversations, the cash withdrawals, the way Veda had been acting for months. Mason listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making a small sound of understanding. You want to catch her in the act, he said when I finished. I want to know what I'm dealing with. Really know, not just suspect. Mason stirred his coffee thoughtfully. I've got a camera set up from my security days. Small, wireless, records to a hard drive. You could set it up in your living room, maybe the kitchen, anywhere they might. He trailed off. Anywhere they might what? Brooks, you sure you want to see whatever's on those recordings? I thought about that question for a long moment. Did I want to see my wife with another man in our house, on our furniture, in the life we'd built together? Did I want that image burned into my memory forever? I need to know, I said finally. I can't make decisions based on whispers through a baby monitor. Mason nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this right. Legal, documented, everything above board. If this goes where I think it might go, you want clean evidence. We spent the next hour planning. Mason would provide the camera equipment and help me set it up. I would stay at a motel across town, maintaining the fiction of the conference while monitoring the recordings remotely. If we caught what we expected to catch, I'd have options. One more thing, Mason said as we prepared to leave. You mentioned Isla Corvin the other night. Veda's friend who's been asking you to dinner. What about her? Just be careful there, too. Women like Isla, they don't usually pay attention to married maintenance guys unless there's a reason. I wanted to argue with him, to defend Isla's motives as purely friendly, but Mason had 30 years of reading people, and his instincts were usually sound. I'll be careful, I said. The camera setup took less than an hour. Mason positioned 2 small devices, one in the living room, angled to catch the couch and coffee table, another in the kitchen with a view of the breakfast nook where Veda liked to have her morning coffee. Both were virtually invisible, tucked behind picture frames and decorative objects. Motion activated, Mason explained, showing me the app on my phone. You'll get alerts when they start recording, and you can watch live or review later. Battery life is about 48 hours. I checked into the Riverside Motel under my own name, telling the desk clerk I was in town for business. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and featured a view of the highway, but it had decent Wi-Fi and a comfortable chair where I could monitor my phone. The first alert came at 6:23 p.m. I opened the app with trembling fingers, not sure what I expected to see. The living room camera showed Veda moving around, straightening cushions and lighting candles. She'd changed from her work clothes into a black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. She looked beautiful, radiant even, in a way I hadn't seen in months. At 6:45, the doorbell rang. Veda practically floated to answer it, and Zane Marinor walked into my house like he owned it. He was everything I wasn't, tall, confident, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He handed Veda a bottle of wine and a small gift box, kissing her cheek in a way that suggested familiarity, comfort, routine. I watched them move to the kitchen, where Veda opened the wine while Zane leaned against the counter, talking and gesturing with his hands. The audio was clear enough to catch most of their conversation. How long do we have? Zane asked. Until Thursday afternoon. He won't be back until after 3. Good. I made reservations at Le Bernardin for tomorrow night. Figured we deserved somewhere special. Le Bernardin, the French place downtown where dinner for 2 costs more than our monthly grocery budget. I'd suggested it once for our anniversary, and Veda had laughed, saying we should save money for practical things. They moved to the living room with their wine, settling onto the couch where Veda and I watched movies on Sunday afternoons. Zane pulled her close, and she curled against him with an ease that spoke of practice, of many evenings just like this one. I hate sneaking around, Veda said, her voice soft. I know, but it won't be forever. Once you figure out the situation with Brooks. It's complicated. He's not a bad person, just limited. He thinks changing a light bulb is a major accomplishment. They laughed together, and something cold settled in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Something colder and more focused. I watched for another hour as they talked, drank wine, and made plans for their secret life together. Plans that included a weekend in Vermont, a possible trip to Europe in the fall, and eventually finding a way to transition out of my marriage with minimal complications. He'll probably be relieved, Zane said at one point. Guys like that, they know when they are outclassed. He'll take his tools and his little projects and find some other woman who thinks fixing a leaky faucet is romantic. Veda laughed. You're terrible, but probably right. I turned off the app and sat in the motel room's artificial light, listening to the hum of the highway outside. They weren't wrong about some things. I wasn't flashy or ambitious in ways that impressed people at cocktail parties. I didn't wear expensive suits or make reservations at restaurants that required a month's notice. But they were wrong about the most important thing. I wasn't stupid, and I wasn't going to be relieved. I was going to be methodical. My phone buzzed with a text from Isla. Hope the conference is going well. Looking forward to hearing about Veda's party when you get back. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Conference is very educational, learning a lot about things I never noticed before. Her response came quickly. Sometimes a change of perspective shows us what was always there. I read that message 3 times before putting the phone aside. Mason's warning echoed in my mind, but something about Isla's words felt different from the conversation I'd just watched between my wife and her boyfriend. Less calculated, more genuine. Or maybe I was just desperate to believe someone saw value in the man Veda and Zane found so laughably ordinary. The camera alerts continued through the night. I didn't watch them all. Some things didn't need to be burned into my memory, but I saved every recording, building a digital archive of my wife's betrayal. By Thursday morning, I had 17 hours of footage and a plan that was beginning to take shape. I drove home Thursday afternoon, timing my arrival for exactly when I'd told Veda to expect me. The house looked normal from the outside. Same peeling paint on the shutters, same overgrown hedge I'd been meaning to trim, same crooked mailbox that listed slightly to the left. Inside, everything was perfectly clean. Too clean. The living room had been scrubbed and vacuumed. The kitchen counters gleamed, and the scent of industrial-strength cleaner hung in the air like guilt made tangible. "How was the conference?" Veda asked, emerging from the laundry room with a basket of freshly folded clothes. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who'd just completed a challenging project. "Educational," I said, which was true enough. Learned a lot about systems I thought I understood. She smiled and kissed my cheek, the same casual affection she'd shown me for years. "I missed you. The house was so quiet without you here." I almost laughed at that. According to my recordings, the house had been anything but quiet, but I just nodded and asked about Emma, about work, about all the ordinary details of a life I was beginning to understand had been a performance for months. That evening, after Veda went to bed, I sat in my workshop and reviewed the footage from the previous 2 days. What I saw was worse than I'd expected, not because of what they did, but because of how comfortable they were doing it. This wasn't a new affair or a moment of weakness. This was a relationship, complete with inside jokes, shared plans, and casual intimacy that spoke of time and familiarity. They'd been together for months, maybe longer. Friday morning, I called in sick to work, something I'd done maybe 3 times in 5 years, and drove to Mason's house. He lived in a small ranch in the older part of town, the kind of neighborhood where people knew their neighbors and noticed when strangers lingered too long. "You look like hell," he said, opening the door before I could knock. "Feel worse. You got time to look at some footage?" We spent 2 hours going through the recordings. Mason watched with the detached professionalism of someone who'd seen every variation of human behavior during his police career, occasionally making notes or asking me to replay a section. "This is solid evidence," he said when we finished. "Clear faces, clear audio, documented timeline. Any divorce attorney would love to have this." "I'm not ready for attorneys yet," Mason raised an eyebrow. "What are you ready for?" I'd been thinking about that question since Wednesday night. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Simply to end the marriage and move on? I want her to understand that I'm not as stupid as she thinks I am. And then? Then we'll see. Mason leaned back in his chair, studying me with cop eyes. "Brooks, I've seen this before. Betrayed spouse, solid evidence, plans for payback. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You need to think about what happens after you prove your point." "I know." "Do you? Because right now you're angry, and anger makes people do things they regret later. What's your end game here?" I didn't have a good answer for that, so I changed the subject. "Can you help me with something else? I need to know more about Zane Marinor, where he lives, what he drives, where he spends his time." Mason sighed, but nodded. "I'll make some calls." That afternoon, my phone rang. Isla's name on the screen. "Brooks, I hope you don't mind me calling. I wanted to see if you'd like to have dinner again this week. I have some more ideas for Veda's party." I found myself saying yes before I'd consciously decided to answer. We agreed to meet Saturday evening at a different restaurant, a small seafood place near the harbor. Saturday arrived gray and cold, with the kind of wind that cut through your jacket and reminded you that spring was still weeks away. I spent the day working on legitimate projects around the house, replacing a broken outlet, fixing a loose floorboard, cleaning the gutters, while Veda ran errands and spent time with Emma. We moved around each other with practiced courtesy, 2 people sharing space without really connecting. Had it always been like this? Or was I only noticing now because I knew what enthusiasm looked like when she was with someone else? "I'm having dinner with Isla tonight," I mentioned while Veda was feeding Emma. "More party planning." "That's sweet of you to take such an interest," she said without looking up. "Isla always said you were more thoughtful than most men." "She said that?" She thinks you're underappreciated." The comment stayed with me as I drove to the harbor that evening. The restaurant Isla had chosen was smaller and more intimate than our first meeting place, with weathered wood paneling and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged quiet conversation. I found her at a corner table, wearing a dark green sweater that brought out her eyes. She'd ordered wine for both of us, a gesture that felt both presumptuous and oddly comforting. "You look tired," she said as I sat down. "Everyone keeps telling me that." Maybe because it's true. She studied my face with that direct gaze I was beginning to recognize. How was the conference? Enlightening. Something in my tone made her pause, wineglass halfway to her lips. Brooks, is everything okay? You seem different tonight. I had a choice in that moment. I could continue the pretense, keep playing the role of the oblivious husband planning his wife's surprise party. Or I could trust the woman sitting across from me, the one who'd asked if I was happy, who'd called me underappreciated. Can I ask you something? I said. She nodded. How long have you known about Veda and Zane? Isla went very still. The restaurant sounds, conversations, clinking glasses, the soft jazz from hidden speakers, seemed to fade into background noise. How long have you known that I know? She asked quietly. I'm not sure I do. That's why I'm asking. She set down her wineglass with careful precision. 3 months, maybe 4. She started mentioning him in conversations, little things at first. How funny he was, how different from other guys at her office. Then she started canceling plans, always with perfectly reasonable excuses. And then she started talking about you differently, like you were a problem to be managed instead of a person she loved. The honesty in her voice hit me harder than I'd expected. Why didn't you tell me? What was I supposed to say? Hi, Brooks. I think your wife might be having an affair based on some conversations and a feeling. You would have thought I was jealous or crazy or both. And now? Isla reached across the table and touched my hand. The same gesture from our first dinner, but with different weight behind it. Now I think you've figured it out on your own, and you're trying to decide what to do about it. I told her everything. The monitor conversations, the surveillance footage, the 2 days of watching my wife play house with another man in our home. Isla listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled as the story continued. I'm sorry, she said when I finished. I'm so sorry you had to find out that way. Are you? The question surprised both of us. Isla's hand was still covering mine, warm and steady. What do you mean? I mean, are you sorry? Or are you relieved that I finally know? She was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the same thoughtfulness she'd shown when planning Veda's fictional party. I'm relieved, she said finally. I've been watching you for months, seeing how she treats you, how she talks about you when you're not around. You deserve better than that. Better than what? Better than someone who thinks you're too ordinary to notice when your whole world is falling apart. We sat in silence for a while, her hand still covering mine, both of us processing the shift in our relationship. Whatever this was, friendship, alliance, something more complicated, it was real in a way my marriage apparently hadn't been for months. What are you going to do? She asked eventually. I don't know yet, but I'm not going to pretend I don't know anymore. Isla nodded slowly. Whatever you decide, you don't have to do it alone. I drove home that night thinking about her words, about the feel of her hand on mine, about the way she'd looked at me when she said I deserved better. The house was dark when I arrived, Veda already asleep, Emma peaceful in her crib. I checked the monitor one more time before bed, but heard only the familiar sounds of an old house settling into night. No whispered phone calls, no secret plans. Just silence and the soft static of electronics doing their job. But the silence felt different now. Not peaceful, but loaded with potential energy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Change was coming. I could feel it building. Sunday morning brought the kind of false spring day that made you believe winter might actually end someday. Warm sunshine streamed through the kitchen windows as I made coffee and watched Veda feed Emma in her high chair. From the outside, we probably looked like any normal family enjoying a quiet weekend morning, but I was cataloging details now, storing them away like evidence. The way Veda's phone buzzed constantly with texts she angled away from me. The way she'd started wearing perfume on weekdays but not weekends. The way she talked about her coworkers with new enthusiasm, especially when mentioning team lunches and after-work drinks. I might be late Tuesday, she mentioned casually, wiping Emma's face. Zane's presenting the quarterly analysis to the board, and the whole team is going out to celebrate afterward. Zane. She'd started using his name in casual conversation, testing whether I'd react. I didn't give her the satisfaction. Sounds fun, I said, turning a page in the newspaper I wasn't really reading. You don't mind? I know Tuesday is usually our night to watch movies. Our night to watch movies. When had we last actually done that? I couldn't remember the last time we'd sat on the couch together, sharing popcorn and arguing about what to stream, but I played along. Of course not. You work hard. You should celebrate with your team. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd married. Bright, engaged, genuinely happy. It was just that her happiness no longer had anything to do with me. Monday, I took a long lunch and drove to Mason's house. He was waiting with a manila folder thick with information. Zane Marinor, he said, spreading photos and documents across his kitchen table. 28 years old, graduated from state with a business degree, works as a senior consultant at Pinnacle Financial, lives in the Riverside Towers, drives a red BMW, belongs to the country club, and according to my sources, has a reputation as a player. I studied a photo of Zane leaving his apartment building, phone pressed to his ear, looking like every generic success story from a corporate recruitment brochure. What kind of reputation? The kind where he's been through 3 serious relationships in the past 2 years, always with women who had something he wanted. Access, connections, money. Your wife might not be as special as she thinks she is. That information should have made me feel better, but it didn't. If anything, it made Veda's betrayal seem more pathetic. She was risking our marriage for a man who collected women like trophies. There's more, Mason continued, pulling out another set of photos. These are from last weekend, while you were at your fake conference. The photos showed Zane and Veda at an upscale restaurant, holding hands across a candlelit table. They looked like magazine models playing the part of successful young couple, all styled hair and expensive clothes and practiced smiles. Who took these? Friend of mine who works security at the restaurant. I asked him to keep an eye out. Mason leaned back in his chair. Brooks, I have to ask, what's your plan here? Because surveillance is one thing, but if you're thinking about confronting this guy, I'm not going to hurt him, if that's what you're worried about. Good, because guys like Zane, they have lawyers and connections. You can't afford that kind of trouble. I'm not planning to do anything illegal. But you are planning something. I was, though I wasn't ready to share the details yet. The plan was still forming, pieces clicking into place as I learned more about the players involved. I want to understand the full scope of this before I make any decisions, I said. How long it's been going on, how serious it is, what they're planning for the future. Mason nodded slowly. Just remember, the more you dig, the more you're going to find. And once you know everything, you can't unknow it. Tuesday evening, I sat in my workshop pretending to repair a broken radio while monitoring Veda's team celebration through the camera app. She'd come home at 6, showered and changed into the black dress again, and left at 7 with a kiss on my cheek and a promise not to be too late. The cameras showed an empty house until nearly midnight, when Veda and Zane stumbled through the front door, clearly having had more than a few drinks. They moved to the living room, and I watched my wife curl up on our couch with another man, laughing at jokes I couldn't hear, touching him with casual intimacy that spoke of comfort and familiarity. I should go, Zane said around 12:30. Early meeting tomorrow. Stay a little longer, Veda replied, pulling him closer. Brooks sleeps like a rock. He'll never know. But I did know. I knew everything now, and the weight of that knowledge was becoming harder to carry alone. Wednesday afternoon, Isla called. How are you holding up? She asked without preamble. I'm not sure. Some days I feel angry, some days I just feel tired. Want to talk about it? I'm free for dinner if you need to get out of the house. I found myself saying yes again, drawn to the promise of honest conversation with someone who saw me as more than just an obstacle to be managed. We met at a small Italian place on the other side of town, far enough from our usual haunts that we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. Ela was already waiting when I arrived, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her look younger, more relaxed. You look better, she said as I sat down. Thanks, I think. I mean it. Less haunted, more determined. She wasn't wrong. The initial shock of discovery was fading, replaced by something colder and more focused. I was beginning to understand what I wanted to do, even if I wasn't ready to act on it yet. Can I ask you something personal? I said. Shoot. Why are you helping me? Really, we barely knew each other before this whole thing started. Isla considered the question while twirling pasta around her fork. Honestly, because I've been watching Veda treat you like you're invisible for months, and it made me angry. You're a good man, Brooks. You deserve someone who sees that. How can you be sure I'm a good man? Maybe I'm just better at hiding my flaws. Are you? Hiding my flaws? Probably not. I'm pretty much what you see. That's what I mean. She reached across the table and touched my hand again, the gesture becoming familiar. You're genuine. You say what you mean. You do what you promise. You care about doing things right. That's rare. Veda doesn't seem to think so? Veda's an idiot. The bluntness of it made me laugh, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. That's not very loyal, considering she's your best friend. Was my best friend. Past tense. You don't get to keep that title when you throw away something valuable because you're too selfish to recognize its worth. We talked for 2 hours, about everything and nothing. My work at the school, her gallery, books we'd read, places we'd like to travel. Normal conversation between two people getting to know each other, except for the weight of shared secrets underneath. I should probably head home, I said eventually, though I didn't want the evening to end. Brooks? Isla's voice stopped me as I reached for my wallet. Whatever you're planning, be careful. I can see the wheels turning, and I'm worried you're going to do something you'll regret. What makes you think I'm planning anything? Because you're not the kind of man who accepts being made a fool of, and because you've gotten very good at not answering direct questions. She was right about both things. I was planning something, and I was getting better at keeping my own secrets. I won't do anything stupid, I promised. Define stupid. Illegal, violent, permanently damaging. What about temporarily damaging? I smiled. That's still on the table? Driving home, I thought about Isla's concern, about Mason's warnings, about the line between justice and revenge. They were right to worry. The man Veda had married probably would have confronted her directly, demanded explanations, tried to work things out through conversation and counseling. But that man had been too stupid to notice what was happening in his own house. The man I was becoming had different ideas about how to handle betrayal. Thursday morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a divorce attorney Mason had recommended, setting up a consultation for the following week. The second was to Pinnacle Financial, asking to speak with someone about their consulting services. I'll transfer you to Zane Marinor, the receptionist said. He handles new client inquiries. Perfect, I said. That's exactly who I wanted to talk to. The pieces were falling into place. Soon, it would be time to show Veda and Zane exactly how stupid the idiot upstairs really was. Zane Marinor had the kind of voice that probably impressed people in boardrooms. Confident, smooth, with just enough authority to suggest he knew things you didn't. When he answered his office phone Thursday afternoon, he sounded like a man who'd never encountered a problem he couldn't solve with the right combination of charm and connections. Zane Marinor, senior consultant. How can I help you today? Mr. Marinor, my name is Brooks Carvin. I'm looking into financial consulting services for a property development project. Excellent. Property development is one of our specialties. What kind of project are we talking about? I fed him a story about renovating historic buildings, converting them into upscale residential units. It wasn't entirely fiction. I'd been researching real estate investment for months, thinking about ways to build wealth beyond my maintenance salary, but now the research had a different purpose. That sounds fascinating, Zane said, and I could hear him warming to the topic. Historic renovation can be incredibly lucrative if it's done right. I'd love to discuss the possibilities. Are you free for lunch tomorrow? Say, Meridian at noon? Meridian. The same upscale restaurant where he'd taken my wife for their romantic dinner. The irony was almost too perfect. That works for me, I said. How will I recognize you? I'll be the guy in the navy suit with the red tie. And you? Work clothes, I said. I'm coming straight from a job site. Friday at noon, I walked into Meridian wearing my cleanest pair of work pants and a button-down shirt that had seen better days. The hostess looked me up and down with barely concealed disapproval, clearly wondering if I was lost. I'm meeting Zane Marinor, I said. Her expression shifted to professional courtesy. Of course. Right this way. Zane was already seated at a corner table, checking his phone with the casual arrogance of someone who expected others to wait for him. He looked exactly like his photos, tall, well-groomed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a week. Brooks? He stood and extended a hand, flashing the kind of smile that had probably been perfected through years of practice. Great to meet you. Thanks for choosing Pinnacle for your consulting needs. I shook his hand, noting the soft palm and manicured nails. This was the man my wife found more appealing than her husband. This was who she thought deserved her attention, her affection, her future. Thanks for making time, I said, settling into the chair across from him. We ordered, Zane went with the salmon, I chose a burger, and spent the first few minutes on small talk. He asked about my background, and I gave him an edited version of my work history, emphasizing the renovation projects I'd done on the side. Maintenance and renovation, he said, nodding approvingly. That's smart. Understanding the nuts and bolts gives you a real advantage in property development. Too many investors get caught up in the glamorous stuff and forget about foundation issues, electrical problems, all the unglamorous details that can make or break a project. He wasn't wrong, and despite everything, I found myself almost liking him in those first few minutes. He was knowledgeable, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in the fictional project I was describing. Then he started talking about his other clients. I'm working with several investors in the historic district right now, he said. cutting into his salmon with precise movements. Beautiful properties, great potential, but some of them require creative solutions to maximize profitability. What kind of creative solutions? Well, for example, I have one client who's married to a guy with no vision. Nice enough fellow, I'm sure, but he thinks small. She's interested in leveraging their joint assets for a major acquisition, but he's the type who'd rather put money in a savings account than take calculated risks. I kept my expression neutral, but something cold was spreading through my chest. Sounds complicated. It can be, but there are ways to restructure assets, create separate investment vehicles, minimize the domestic complications. The key is timing and discretion. Discretion? Zane smiled, and there was something predatory in it now. Let's just say that sometimes the best business decisions are made when all parties have access to complete information, and sometimes they're not. He was talking about financial infidelity, about helping my wife hide assets, move money, position herself for a divorce that would leave me with as little as possible. And he was doing it while eating lunch at a restaurant that cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. That's interesting, I said carefully. How does that work exactly? Well, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to protect assets during a potential transition, there are several strategies. Offshore accounts, shell companies, investment trusts, all perfectly legal, of course, but not necessarily transparent to someone who doesn't know where to look. And your client is interested in these strategies? Very interested. In fact, we're meeting this weekend to finalize some of the paperwork. She's quite motivated to get things in place before her husband becomes aware of the changing circumstances. I managed to finish my burger, though it tasted like cardboard. Zane continued talking about investment strategies and market opportunities, but I was barely listening. My mind was racing, processing the implications of what he'd just told me. Veda wasn't just having an affair, she was planning to rob me blind in the process. This has been very helpful, I said when the check arrived. I'll need some time to think about the options you've outlined. Of course. Take all the time you need. Zane handed me his business card with another practiced smile. And Brooks, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you seem like a smart guy, smarter than most people probably give you credit for. What makes you say that? Just a feeling. You ask good questions, you listen more than you talk, and you think before you respond. Those are rare qualities in my business. I almost laughed at the irony. Here was my wife's boyfriend, complimenting me on the same qualities she found so tedious. Thanks, I said. I'll be in touch. I drove straight to Mason's house, my hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. He took one look at my face and put on a pot of coffee without asking questions. That bad? He said when I finished recounting the lunch conversation. Worse. They're not just having an affair, they're planning to steal everything I've worked for. Mason whistled low. Financial planning for a divorce that hasn't been filed yet. That's cold, even for a cheating spouse. What can I do about it? Legally, you can protect yourself. Move money into accounts she can't access. Document all your assets. Make sure you have copies of every important financial document. But Brooks? What? This changes things. If she's planning to take you to the cleaners, you can't afford to play nice. You need to get aggressive, and you need to do it fast. I spent the rest of the afternoon at Mason's kitchen table, making lists and phone calls. By evening, I'd moved half our savings into a new account at a different bank, photographed every important document in our home office, and scheduled meetings with both a divorce attorney and a forensic accountant. I also made one more call. Isla, it's Brooks. Are you free for dinner tonight? I need to tell you something, and I'd rather do it in person. We met at a quiet bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the lighting was dim and the conversations were private. Isla was already waiting in a corner booth, nursing a glass of wine and looking worried. What happened? She asked as soon as I sat down. I told her about my lunch with Zane, about the financial planning, about the scope of Veda's betrayal. Isla listened with growing horror, her face pale in the bar's amber light. She's planning to rob you, she said when I finished. Looks that way. Brooks, I'm so sorry. I knew she was having an affair, but this is something else entirely. It is, and it changes what I'm planning to do about it. Isla reached across the table and took my hand. What are you planning? I'm going to beat them at their own game, but I'm going to need help. What kind of help? I looked at her across the table, this woman who'd become my ally, my confidant, my anchor in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. She'd already risked her friendship with Veda to help me. Now I was about to ask her to risk much more. The kind that might get complicated, I said. The kind that might change everything between us. Isla squeezed my hand. I'm listening. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I began to believe I might actually win. Saturday morning, I woke up with the clarity that comes after a night of difficult decisions. Veda was already gone, another work emergency that required her immediate attention on the weekend. Emma was playing quietly in her crib, content with the mobile I'd installed above her bed. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, sketching out the framework of what I was beginning to think of as my counter-offensive. If Veda and Zane wanted to play financial games, I'd show them what a maintenance supervisor who actually paid attention could accomplish. The first call was to my divorce attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in cases involving hidden assets and financial deception. "Mr. Carvin," she said when I explained the situation, "you're in a better position than most people in your circumstances. The fact that you discovered their planning before they could execute it gives us significant advantages." "What kind of advantages?" "For starters, we can freeze joint accounts, document all marital assets, and file for divorce on grounds of adultery with evidence of financial misconduct. That tends to influence how judges view property division." "How long do we have?" "Based on what you've told me, they're planning to move quickly. We need to move quicker. Can you come in Monday morning? We'll file paperwork by noon." My second call was to Mason. "I need that surveillance equipment again, and I need to know more about Zane's weekend plans." "Already on it," he said. "My restaurant contact says they have reservations tonight at Le Bernardin. Table for 2, 9 o'clock. "Perfect. Brooks, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal, nothing violent. Just a little education about the consequences of underestimating people." That afternoon, I drove to Riverside Towers, Zane's upscale apartment building. The parking garage was the kind of place where every car cost more than most people's annual salary, all gleaming metal and European engineering. I found Zane's red BMW easily enough, vanity plates reading ZNMROR, and spent a few minutes studying the security cameras, the access points, the general layout. I wasn't planning to do anything to the car, not yet anyway, but reconnaissance was always the first step in any successful operation. My phone buzzed with a text from Isla. "How are you holding up? Want company for dinner?" I considered the offer. Spending the evening with Isla sounded infinitely better than sitting alone in my house, knowing my wife was out with her boyfriend, but I had work to do. "Rain check," I texted back. "Working on the project we discussed." "Be careful," she replied. "Call if you need backup." Backup. The word stayed with me as I drove home. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was facing this alone. Sunday evening, Veda returned from her weekend work emergency in an excellent mood, humming while she unpacked her overnight bag. She'd brought Emma a small stuffed elephant and me a coffee mug from some boutique hotel gift shop. "How was your emergency?" I asked, accepting the mug with what I hoped looked like gratitude. "Exhausting but productive. We managed to resolve the client crisis, and I think it's going to lead to some exciting opportunities." Exciting opportunities. That was one way to describe planning your husband's financial destruction. "I'm glad it worked out," I said. That night, after Veda went to bed, I sat in my workshop and made final preparations. The surveillance equipment was repositioned and tested. My documentation was organized and copied. My attorney had all the evidence she needed to file papers first thing Monday morning. Everything was ready except for one final piece of the puzzle. Monday morning, I called Pinnacle Financial. "Zane Marinor's office. This is Brooks Carvin. I had lunch with Mr. Marinor on Friday to discuss consulting services. I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting." "Let me check his calendar. He has an opening Wednesday at 2. Would that work?" "Actually, I was hoping for something sooner. This is time-sensitive, and I'm ready to move forward with the engagement." "Hold on. Let me ask him." I waited, listening to generic hold music while my heart hammered against my ribs. "Mr. Carvin, Zane can see you tomorrow at 11. Will that work?" "Perfect. Same place as before?" "Actually, he'd prefer to meet at the office this time. He wants to show you some presentation materials." "Even better. An office meeting would be more formal, more documented, and much harder for Zane to explain away later." Tuesday morning, I put on my best shirt and only tie, kissed Veda goodbye, and drove to the Pinnacle Financial Building downtown. It was one of those glass and steel monuments to capitalism, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong in the world of high finance. The elevator ride to the 15th floor gave me time to review my plan one more time. I had 2 goals for this meeting: gather more information about their specific plans, and plant seeds of doubt about their assumptions regarding my intelligence and awareness. Zane's office was exactly what I'd expected: floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, and enough diplomas and awards on the walls to impress clients who cared about such things. He greeted me with the same practiced smile, but I thought I detected something different in his manner, more focused, perhaps, more serious. "Brooks, good to see you again. I've been thinking about your project, and I have some ideas that might interest you. I'm all ears." He launched into a presentation about property acquisition strategies, financing options, and market timing. It was professional, thorough, and completely beside the point. I let him talk for 20 minutes before steering the conversation toward what I really wanted to discuss. "This is all very helpful," I said during a natural pause. "But I'm curious about something you mentioned at lunch. The client who's dealing with domestic complications?" Zane's smile flickered slightly. "What about her?" "You said timing and discretion were important factors. I'm wondering if there are lessons from her situation that might apply to my project." "How so?" "Well, I'm married too, and while my wife is generally supportive of my business interests, she doesn't always understand the complexities of investment strategy. If I decide to move forward with this project, I want to make sure I structure things in a way that minimizes domestic friction." Zane leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. "That's very thoughtful of you. Most men don't consider the relational aspects of financial planning. I've learned that it's usually easier to ask forgiveness than permission, but only if you're careful about how you handle the details." "Exactly." He was warming to the topic now, apparently convinced that I was a kindred spirit in the art of marital deception. "The key is creating structures that provide flexibility without requiring full disclosure of every transaction. Like the offshore accounts you mentioned? Among other things. The important thing is maintaining plausible deniability while protecting your assets from emotional decision-making." "Your other client, the one with the unimaginative husband, how is she handling that balance?" Zane smiled, and there was something almost conspiratorial in it now. "Very carefully. She's been moving money gradually, establishing separate investment accounts, building a financial foundation that's independent of her husband's involvement. By the time he realizes what's happening, the new structure will be fait accompli." "And he won't be able to challenge it?" "Not effectively, especially if the transition coincides with other relationship changes." There it was. The admission I'd been hoping for, delivered with casual confidence by a man who had no idea he was confessing to his victim. "That's impressive planning," I said. "It has to be. Her husband isn't stupid, exactly, but he's not sophisticated about financial matters. He thinks in terms of paychecks and savings accounts. She's thinking in terms of wealth preservation and strategic positioning." "When is she planning to implement this strategy?" "Soon. We're finalizing the offshore arrangements this week, and she's planning to initiate the relationship transition shortly afterward." Relationship transition. The euphemism was almost elegant in its coldness. I spent another 20 minutes listening to Zane outline various strategies for hiding assets and minimizing spousal claims during divorce proceedings. He was thorough, knowledgeable, and completely convinced that he was talking to a potential co-conspirator rather than his victim. "This has been incredibly helpful," I said when the meeting concluded. "I'll need a few days to consider the options, but I'm very interested in moving forward." "Excellent. And Brooks, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you're handling this situation with real maturity. A lot of men would let emotion cloud their judgment." "I've learned that emotion is a luxury I can't afford," I said, "not when there's this much at stake." I left Pinnacle Financial with everything I needed: detailed admissions of financial planning for an undisclosed divorce, timeline information, and enough evidence to bury both Veda and Zane in any legal proceeding. But I wasn't ready for legal proceedings yet. First, I wanted them to understand exactly what kind of man they'd been underestimating. My phone rang as I reached the parking garage. Isla's name on the screen. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than I hoped. Want to have dinner tonight? I have news." "Good news or bad news?" "For me? Very good news." "For them?" "Well, they're about to learn that the idiot upstairs isn't as stupid as they thought." That evening, sitting across from Isla at our usual corner table, I outlined everything I'd learned and everything I was planning to do about it. She listened with a mixture of admiration and concern, occasionally asking questions or suggesting refinements to my strategy. "You're really going to do this," she said when I finished. "I'm really going to do this." "And after? When it's all over?" I reached across the table and took her hand, the gesture that had become our signature. "After, I'm going to start over, with someone who thinks I'm worth more than a consolation prize." Isla smiled, and for the first time in months, the future looked like something worth planning for. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. I woke early, made coffee, and spent an hour in my workshop putting the finishing touches on what I'd come to think of as my masterpiece of revenge. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of confronting Veda and Zane directly, instead of dramatic scenes and emotional confrontations, I was going to let them destroy themselves with their own arrogance and assumptions. At 9 a.m., I called Patricia Hendricks. "The divorce papers are ready," she said. "Financial affidavits, asset protection orders, everything we discussed. Do you want to proceed with service?" "Not yet. I want to give them a little more rope first." "Brooks, I have to advise you that waiting increases the risk they'll move assets before we can freeze them. They won't have the chance. Trust me." My second call was to Mason. "It's time. Are you ready?" "Equipment's in place, backup recordings are secure, and I've got 3 witnesses lined up if we need them." "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." At 10:30, I called Pinnacle Financial one more time. Zane Marinor's office. "This is Brooks Carvin. I need to speak with Zane immediately. It's urgent." "He's in a meeting, but—" "Tell him it's about his client with the domestic complications. Tell him her husband found out about the offshore accounts." The line went quiet for a moment. Then, "Please hold." Zane came on the line 30 seconds later, his smooth confidence replaced by sharp concern. "Brooks, what's going on?" "We need to meet. Now. Your client's situation just became very complicated." "What kind of complicated?" "The kind where her husband hired a forensic accountant and knows about the shell companies. Can you meet me at Meridian in an hour?" Yes, I'll be there." I hung up and smiled. Phase 1 complete. At 11:30, I walked into Meridian wearing the same work clothes from our first meeting. Zane was already there, looking significantly less polished than usual. His tie was crooked, his hair slightly mussed, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. "Brooks, thank God you're here. What exactly happened?" I sat down and signaled the waitress for coffee. "My wife got careless, left some documents where I could find them. Bank statements, correspondence with offshore institutions, legal papers she'd been hiding." Zane went pale. "What kind of legal papers?" "Divorce papers. Preliminary asset division. A very detailed plan for how she was going to leave me with nothing while she disappeared with our daughter and everything we'd built together." That's not possible. We were careful." "Were you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you underestimated exactly how stupid I really am." The words hung in the air between us. Zane stared at me, and I could see the exact moment when understanding dawned in his eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "I've known for weeks. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Zane's composure cracked completely. "Look, Brooks, I can explain. No need. I understand perfectly. You thought you found an easy mark. Boring maintenance guy, probably doesn't pay attention to finances, definitely doesn't have the sophistication to notice when his wife is planning to rob him blind. Did I get that right? It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen? You steal my wife, steal my money, steal my daughter, and I just accept it because I'm too stupid to fight back?" "I never wanted to hurt you. But you were willing to destroy me for profit. That's actually worse than wanting to hurt me. At least hatred is personal." I pulled out my phone and set it on the table between us. "Here's what's going to happen, Zane. You're going to call Veda right now and tell her the offshore accounts have been discovered. You're going to tell her that her husband isn't the idiot she thought he was. And you're going to recommend that she come clean before this gets any worse for both of you." "And if I don't?" "Then I call Patricia Hendricks, my divorce attorney, and have her file papers this afternoon. Adultery, financial misconduct, attempted fraud. How do you think that's going to play with your employers? With your other clients? With your country club friends?" Zane stared at the phone like it was a weapon pointed at his chest. "You recorded our conversations. I documented everything. Your lunch confessions, your office admissions, your detailed explanations of how you were planning to help my wife steal from me. It's all very thorough." "That's entrapment." "No, that's evidence, and it's going to be very compelling in court." Zane picked up the phone with shaking hands. "What do you want me to say exactly?" "The truth. For once in this whole sordid mess, try telling the truth." He dialed Veda's number. I could hear it ringing through the speaker, then her voice, bright and cheerful. "Zane? What's wrong? You sound terrible." "Veda, we have a problem. Your husband knows about the accounts." Silence. Then, "What do you mean he knows?" "I mean, he knows everything. The offshore planning, the divorce strategy, all of it. He's been investigating us for weeks." "That's impossible. Brooks doesn't have the intelligence to—" "He's sitting right here, Veda. He's been listening to this whole conversation." More silence. Then, in a voice I'd never heard from my wife before, small and frightened, "Brooks?" "Hello, darling. Surprise." "I can explain?" "No need. Zane already explained everything. The shell companies, the asset transfers, the plan to take Emma and disappear while I was left with nothing. A very thorough explanation, actually." "Brooks, please, let me come home. We can talk about this." "We can talk, but not at home. Meet me at Isla's gallery at 6 o'clock. And Veda, bring a lawyer. You're going to need one." I hung up and looked at Zane, who was staring at his hands like he'd never seen them before. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you learn what consequences feel like. I'm filing for divorce this afternoon. Adultery with evidence, financial misconduct with documentation, attempted fraud with recordings. Your involvement in all of this is going to be very public, very detailed, and very expensive for you." "I could lose my job?" "You should lose your job. What you did was unethical, probably illegal, and definitely stupid. Did you really think you could steal from someone and never face consequences?" I stood up and dropped a 20 on the table. "One more thing, Zane. Stay away from my daughter. If I see you anywhere near Emma, anywhere near my house, anywhere near my family, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you really are." I left him sitting there and drove straight to Patricia Hendrick's office. The divorce papers were filed by 3 p.m., along with emergency motions for asset protection and temporary custody. By 4 p.m., all joint accounts were frozen, and Veda's access to our savings was officially terminated. At 5:30, I arrived at Isla's gallery. She was waiting with coffee and nervous energy, pacing between the paintings like a caged cat. "How do you feel?" she asked when I walked in. "Like I just woke up from a very long, very unpleasant dream." "Any regrets?" I considered the question seriously. Did I regret the end of my marriage? The destruction of the life Veda and I had built together? The fact that Emma would grow up in a broken home? "I regret that it came to this," I said finally. "But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret refusing to be a victim." Veda arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he'd been pulled away for more important business. She was pale, composed, but I could see the fear in her eyes. "Brooks," she said, "we need to talk." "We're talking. Say what you came to say." "I made mistakes. I know that. But we can work through this. We have a daughter together, a life together. That has to count for something." "It did count for something, until you decided it was worth less than whatever Zane was offering." "It wasn't about him, it was about us, about how we'd grown apart, about feeling like you didn't see me anymore." "I saw you fine. I just didn't see the person you were pretending to be." Her lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Carvin, my client is prepared to discuss terms for an amicable dissolution." "There's nothing amicable about attempted theft," I interrupted. "Your client tried to rob me. The only terms I'm interested in are the ones that ensure she faces consequences for that choice." "The offshore accounts were never funded," Veda said desperately. "We didn't actually take anything." "You planned to take everything. The only reason you didn't succeed is because you underestimated the idiot you married." The words hit her like a physical blow. She flinched, and for a moment, I saw genuine remorse in her expression. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered. "But you did mean for it to go somewhere. You meant to betray me, to steal from me, to destroy our family for your own benefit. The only thing you didn't mean was to get caught." I turned to her lawyer. "Your client has 24 hours to respond to the divorce petition. After that, we proceed with full litigation, including criminal referrals for the financial misconduct. Make sure she understands what that means." I walked toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Veda one more time. "You called me too stupid to notice," I said. "You were right for a while, but you made one crucial mistake." "What?" "You assumed that stupid meant helpless. It doesn't." I left them there and walked outside, where Isla was waiting by my truck. "How do you feel now?" she asked. "Like the idiot upstairs just got a lot smarter." She smiled and took my hand. "What happens next?" "Next, I start over, with someone who thinks intelligence comes in different forms, and that fixing things is actually a pretty valuable skill. Anyone in mind?" I kissed her then, right there on the sidewalk outside her gallery, with the evening light fading around us and the future spreading out like an open road. "I might have someone in mind," I said. 6 months later, Veda signed the final divorce papers from her new apartment across town, where she lived alone with supervised visitation rights and a reputation that followed her everywhere she went. Zane had been quietly let go from Pinnacle Financial and had moved to another city, where presumably he was learning to target victims who weren't quite so stupid. And I was learning that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. The monitor in Emma's room still crackled with static sometimes, but now it only carried the sounds of bedtime stories and lullabies. Isla had a beautiful voice, and Emma loved falling asleep to the sound of it. The idiot upstairs had finally gotten smart, and it felt exactly like coming home.